In 1880, 81 years after George Washington's death, there was a story that had been told by Anthony Sherman, which was a man who'd been a close friend to Washington. It related the encounters that George Washington had with a visitor from the spirit world. According to Sherman, in the winter of 1777, General George Washington was studying maps and making military plans in his cabin at Valley Forge when he saw a rising, curling vapor filling the room. An astonished Washington watched a dark-haired, long-robed entity materialize before him. At first, the general thought it was the ghost of a Native American taking form, but then he heard 3 loud blasts from a trumpet and a deep, commanding voice say, "Son of the Republican, look and learn." The vapor that surrounded the ghost glowed with surging life as it formed an image of the globe. The entity dipped water onto the forms of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And Washington was horrified when thick black clouds began to rise from each continent. The odious clouds merged into one dark mass that began to move towards North America. Within the black cloud, Washington saw armed men land and begin to devastate cities that had sprung up only moments before. Washington's ears rang with the roars of the cannons, the shouts and cries of millions who had become locked in mortal combat. Above the sounds of strife, the mysterious voice once again admonished him to look and learn. Then, a shadow figure sprinkled water upon North America, and the invading armies were swept away. Washington told his friend Sherman that when the invading armies were swept away, he was once again able to see villages, towns, and cities springing up. In a loud voice, the spirit cried out, "While the stars remain and the heavens send down dew upon the earth, so long shall the Union last." As the vivid scene faded, Washington once again became aware of the mysterious figure in the shadows of his cabin at Valley Forge. "Son of the Republic," the figure said, "what you have seen and thus interpreted. 3 great perils will come upon the Republic. The most fearful for her is the third, but the whole world united shall not prevail against her. Let every child of the Republic learn to live for his God, his land, and his Union." With those words, Washington told his friend, the spirit vanished. He was revitalized in body, mind, and spirit. Washington rose from his chair, convinced that he had seen a vision that had presented him the birth, progress, and destiny of the Union. He was filled with a renewed conviction that the revolution would not fail. As miserable and depressing as the conditions were during that terrible winter in Valley Forge, the ragged, freezing soldiers would not be defeated, and the goals of freedom and independence would be won. And here's another story pertaining to Washington. It was September 1862, and the inexperienced Union troops, they had been shattered in battle after battle by the determined Confederate forces. President Lincoln had called on General George B. McClellan to take charge of all of this chaos and whip the Union troops into shape. McClellan slumped wearily over the desk in his tent. Before him lay campaign maps, battle reports, and a large scale map on which all known Confederate positions had been marked. His eyelids drooped, and he fell asleep on his desk. His slumber didn't last long, though. A booming voice suddenly filled his tent. "General McClellan, do you sleep at your post? Rouse yourself, or before you can prevent it, the foe will be in Washington." Wondering if some bold messenger had come in with news of an impending Confederate attack, McClellan snapped to attention. When he opened his eyes, he beheld a luminous apparition of George Washington. General McClellan later told the Portland, Maine Evening Courier that the spirit of Washington wasted no time delivering his message. If God had not willed it otherwise, before tomorrow's sun had set, the Confederate flag would have waved above the Capitol and your own grave. Note what you see. Your time to act is short. After Washington's ghost made a gesture, a living map detailing the most current Confederate troop positions appeared in front of McClellan. He grabbed a quill from his desk and began to write down all that he could see. He was very much aware that if the Confederate armies took Washington, D.C., they would break the spirit of the entire Union. The living map changed, allowing McClellan to see maneuvers the Confederates planned in the future. He furiously marked the positions that the map revealed to him on his own campaign maps. "You have been warned in time, General McClellan," the spirit of Washington said softly. With those words, the image of George Washington began to fade, and McClellan once again found himself alone in his tent. At first, he thought the experience had been a dream, but then he saw the markings on his map and the symbols of Confederate maneuvers he'd made on his campaign maps. He would give the orders to move out at once. Because of the knowledge that McClellan gained during his unusual paranormal experience, the Union troops were able to halt the Confederate invasion of Washington, and they were able to pursue General Robert E. Lee by anticipating several of his subsequent campaigns. McClellan later wrote of the ghostly manifestation in these words: "Our beloved, glorious Washington shall rest until he may once more become a messenger of peace from the great ruler who has all nations in his keeping." During his lifetime, Abraham Lincoln, one of the most revered presidents in the United States, was constantly harassed for his consultations with the spirit world. Shortly after he was elected president, the Cleveland Plain Dealer lashed out at him for consulting spooks. The president-elect's candid reply was, "The only falsehood in the statement is that half of it has not been told. The article does not begin to tell the wonderful things I have witnessed." Lincoln admitted having consulted the mediums and spiritualists of his day. In an atmosphere where people sought advice from the spirit world, that was what Lincoln was raised in. He was never a skeptic. Historians and biographers have made little fuss about recording that he inherited a strong spiritual heritage from his mother and her family. His consultations varied from those received from backwoods granny women when he was in his youth to sittings with the most famous mediums of the day during the time that he was president. In times of great crisis, the president's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, would arrange seances to calm her husband. Some of the gatherings took place in the White House itself. One of Lincoln's favorite mediums, Nettie Colburn, and other spiritualist channels would relay information from the spirit world that the thoughtful president would consider with all the integrity of his serious nature. There were other participants in these seances. Colonel S.P. Case, Major Van Voorhees, and Daniel E. Soames. Lincoln admitted that the message he received from the spirit world enabled him to come through crisis after crisis. His influence extended to other figures of the time. Even hard-nosed Union General and future President Ulysses S. Grant later turned to spiritualism. And while Lincoln consulted the spirits in life, after his assassination in 1865, his ghost has been seen by many witnesses. President Calvin Coolidge's wife claimed to have seen Lincoln's ghost in the Oval Office. His hands were clasped behind his back as he looked out a window towards the Potomac River. Perhaps because Franklin Roosevelt's years in the White House were full of strife due to World War II, and his spirit was often troubled, Lincoln's ghost appears to have been most active during Roosevelt's 13-year occupancy of the White House. A clerk in the White House claimed to have seen Lincoln's ghost sitting on the edge of a bed and pulling off his boots. In a famous incident, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who was a guest at the White House, she was awakened late at night by a knock on her bedroom door. When she opened the door, she saw Lincoln looking at her from the hallway. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt used the Lincoln bedroom as a study. Although the First Lady never claimed to have seen his spirit, she stated her belief that Lincoln watched over her as she worked in the room. One would expect Lincoln's spirit to be courteous and always knock before entering a room. Presidents Theodore Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, and Harry Truman all claim to have heard what they believed was Abe Lincoln's spirit walking through the hallways of the White House and stopping to knock at their doors. Ronald Reagan was certain that when his dog Rex began to bark, the canine had sensed the ghost of Lincoln, Dolly Madison, Andrew Jackson, and Abigail Adams, whose spirits have all been sighted in various rooms of the White House. It is said that Reagan's daughter, Maureen, who slept in the Lincoln bedroom during her visits, saw Lincoln's ghost on several occasions.